Bonjour, je voudrais partager quelques réflexions sur le mouvement des Gilets jaunes. Comme vous le savez, il s'agit du plus grand mouvement de protestation en France depuis 1968. Pour parler des Gilets jaunes, il faut d'abord parler de Macron, parce qu'à mon avis, c'est un mouvement de protestation qui est inextricablement lié au président Macron. C'est enragé de son approche et de ses priorités. Il essaie de faire la transition vers une économie verte sur le dos des travailleurs. Évidemment, il y a beaucoup d'animosité envers Macron. Vous avez entendu beaucoup de manifestants qui devraient démissionner. Il y a même une chanson Macron démission. C'est donc un tollé très personnel contre ce qui était perçu comme une insensibilité ou une surdité de la part de Macron face aux luttes de la classe ouvrière. Mais si nous regardons trois événements majeurs au cours des 3 dernières années, Brexit, Trump, Gilets jaunes, ce sont trois événements politiques majeurs dans l'Ouest entre 2016 et 2018 qui ont tous pour caractéristique déterminante une division culturelle, peut-être on peut dire une guerre culturelle entre la ville contre la campagne. Par exemple, avec le Brexit, les habitants des grandes zones cosmopolites, Londres, ont voté non au Brexit et les habitants ruraux ont voté pour le Brexit. Avec Trump, les habitants des grandes zones urbaines ont voté contre Trump, ceux des zones rurales ont voté pour Trump. Avec les Gilets jaunes, les habitants des zones rurales, dont les moyens de subsistance, la survie dépend souvent de leur voiture, sont opposés à Macron et soutiennent les Gilets jaunes. Eh bien, voilà, il me semble que nous sommes donc au milieu d'une guerre culturelle entre la ville contre la campagne. Peut-être peut-il échange de regrouper ces trois événements, Brexit, Trump, Gilets jaunes, mais ils ont un point commun que les habitants de la campagne ou des petites communautés désindustrialisées laissent pour compte de la mondialisation qui se rebelle contre l'élite cosmopolite libérale. Si nous regardons à nouveau ces trois événements, Brexit, Trump, Gilets jaunes, en tant que groupe, nous découvrons le stupéfiant constat que l'antimodélisation est maintenant une cause de droite, pas de gauche. C'est étonnant. Si nous repensons à la protestation de WTO 1999, Seattle, il faut un temps où l'antimodélisation était 100% une cause de la gauche. Mais maintenant, si nous regardons la situation, Trump est contre la modélisation, Le Pen est contre la modélisation. Évidemment, les partisans du Brexit sont contre la mondialisation. Trump et Le Pen sont là à droite. Brexit peut être soutenu à gauche et à droite, mais il est principalement considéré comme un mouvement de droite. But I'm going to switch to English now because I have to translate everything to English in the end. Anyways, and the video is going to get too long. So I'm here to talk to you about the Yellow Vests, which I hope you all already know is the largest protest movement in France since 1968. Started November 17th of 2018. It's been going on, every week for 26 weeks. They just had a huge protest on May Day, May 1st. And they had another protest the weekend after May 1st in May of 2019. The protests were sparked by a hike in the fuel tax, which would disproportionately burden working class people in rural areas, often who rely on a car. They live in areas without public transportation. They rely on their car for their livelihood, and this tax would sort of break their bank. I mean, things had been building up for a while. There was, first Macron, their president, he cut the wealth tax. He cut tax on the wealthy. Then there was the railroad strike, and then the fuel tax was the straw that broke the camel's back, and France basically exploded in protest. There was 300,000 people the first week. There was 30,000 people in protest. The next, it's still huge numbers. It's protest transitioning into rioting. You'll see a lot of cars being set on fire. I think Paris, or I think they estimated like the city of Paris lost 2 billion in Christmas sales because normally the Champs-Élysées would be open for, they would make a lot of money during Christmas week, but they all boarded up their stores, all these posh fancy stores, because they were scared of the rioting. To date, I think there are 2,000 known and verified injuries of protesters, and by the police. People have lost a limb, they have lost an eye. Somebody went into a coma after a protest slash riot. There was this iron gate that these protesters were shaking this gate, and somehow, I don't know how they managed to do this without any tools, but somehow they uproot they managed to detach the gate from this fence. The gate came crashing down on like a crowd of 20 people. One of those people is in a coma. The reason they're losing an eye is because of the LBD, Lanceur de Défense, these rubber bullets the size of golf balls that the French police is shooting from launchers into crowds of protesters, and people are regularly losing an eye. I mean, this is the second most powerful Western European democracy, and their country is bordering on being, their civil society is bordering on being ungovernable, such that the police has to shoot rubber bullets the size of golf balls at people, which are regularly taking out people's eyes, and this is all over a tax. Okay, now in the Yellow Vests, there's a lot of crisscrossing constituencies. They refuse to be subsumed under a political party or under a labor union. Or any organization. They refuse to play the representation game. They won't send representatives to meet with the government, except that the one time they did send 8 representatives to meet with the government in December. They sent like 8 of them. I remember with Eric Drouet, that didn't go too well. I think 6 of them never showed up. And one thing of note I did hear about was R.I.C, Referendum d'initiative Citoyenne. You can do a Google search for Yellow Vests, R.I.C. It's they want to get it so that if 700,000 people sign a petition, then the whole country automatically has to vote, like hold a referendum on that, whatever the measure is, and they want to get it so that they want to change the constitution so they can get rid of a president if they don't like him. Basically, they want to take back, democratic control over governance. And I am not going to give you the whole backstory on the Yellow Vests. That's not the purpose of my video. You can read about it online. The purpose of my video is to make 2 points. So, if we look at 3 major events that happened in the West in the last 2-3 years, right? Brexit, Trump, Yellow Vests. At first, Yellow Vests may not seem to fit into that grouping, but just bear with me. And when we ask ourselves these 3 events, why did it happen? Or, what's happening? Which seems to be the question that is often asked in so-called cosmopolitan elite circle, liberal circles, like, what the fuck? Like, how could this happen? Well, it seems to me the answer to that question lies in large part in the issue of a cultural divide between the city and the country, right? Like for Brexit, people in London voted against Brexit for the most part. People in rural areas or post-industrialized, depopulated small towns, they largely voted for Brexit. With Trump, people in cities despise him. People in rural areas, they love him. Okay. Broadly speaking, I'm painting the picture very broadly here. There's always exceptions. Now, Yellow Vests is a little bit different because they have very high public support. The French public support level is very, very high, depending on which poll you read, in which newspaper, at what time. I've seen their approval rating amongst the French public be anywhere from 63 to 84%. That's why the protests are still going on, and they've been going on 26 weeks. So surely there are French people in the city who support the Yellow Vests. I would still argue, however, that Yellow Vest belongs under this rubric of um, events that are emblematic of a cultural divide between the city and the country, because the genesis of the movement of Yellow Vests was so rooted in conditions that are specific to rural areas, namely, there's no public transportation, you rely on your car to drive, maybe you drive 50 kilometers a day to work at a factory, and this fuel tax was just going to break your bank. So 1920 was the first year that U.S. became a majority urban country, so shifted from being majority rural to majority urban. And now 4/5 of the U.S. population lives in cities. In the U.S., is that possible? That seems very high. Well, anyways, that's what the census says. So what is astonishing to me is that in the year 2019, we are still grappling with sort of almost like an identity crisis, between the values and the outlooks and the sensibilities, blah blah, of the city versus the values and the sensibilities and the priorities and of the country, meaning rural areas, right? I mean, it's not like the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, in the first wave of urbanization, and there's cultural dislocation, and we don't know who we are, we're as a country, I mean, it's not like cities are a new thing, and you think we have already digested these differences, this divide between the city and the country, with some, and instead of having assimilated these differences, the culture divide between the city and the country, meaning rural areas, seems to be getting more and more embittered and more irreconcilable. And now, astonishingly, is, in large part, the explanation behind major political events in the West, okay, like Trump, like Brexit, like Yellow Vests. Let me just I'm gonna play a clip for you now that it's just a minute long, and I think it's going to illustrate much more succinctly the points I'm trying to make. So this takes place in London. This is a British political commentator who's asking some questions to a climate activist. Let's just listen to it, and then I'll talk about what it has to do with everything. It's just a minute long.
Can I ask you a question, just to interrupt the constant monologue of you talking? There's this perception I have where I live, and it's a place called the rest of the UK, that climate protesters are massively overprivileged and kind of posh kids, and you seem to be falling straight into that for me. Okay. So can you explain to me why it is that it seems to be almost a luxury of the privilege that live in London to dictate to the rest of us what we should and shouldn't be allowed to do? It feels that way. No, I'm just asking you about this idea of privilege. So like your hero and pin-up, Greta, is actually a very privileged individual with privileged parents. You, it sounds to me, are a privileged individual. Can I just check where you went to school? Can I ask where you went to school? Did you go to a nice boarding school? Does it matter? Yeah, I'm just asking. You've been asking Gerard a lot of questions, and I've only asked you one. Yes, I've only asked you one question. I just want one answer. Just before we move forward, I just want one answer to one question.
That's kind of fun to listen to. Anyways, so the reason why I played that clip is it seems now we are social types first, and the social type is inextricably linked to the political position. It's like if you voted for Trump, you must drive, this type of, you drive a Land Rover, and you must eat this type of food, and you live in this type of place, like city versus rural area. And if you voted, and then on the other hand, if you voted for a liberal, whatever that even means in a U.S. context, a liberal, elite, cosmopolitan candidate, you must I don't know, drive an electric car, and you order skinny cappuccinos with soy milk, and you have a subscription to the New Yorker. I mean, just like this woman from the UK is saying, right? Except for the equivalent of that for the UK, like, oh, you have this political position. Well, that must mean that you have this type of lifestyle, and you have this type of background. I'm not saying what she's saying is true. Okay, I'm saying that that's the prevailing attitude now. Okay, let me give another example. Maybe this will yeah, impart it better. So there's this infamous line that Obama said in 2008, clinging to guns and religion. So in 2008, there was a rally. Somebody asked him a question. In his answer, he said something like, he said, well, it's a pity that there's still Americans that cling to guns and religion, meaning, Americans who are religious and who own guns. The right wing, went ballistic. They were like, oh, you liberal, coastal, elite, Harvard educated, like, how dare you look down on, people just because they have guns or their religion. You don't know the real American, the meat and potatoes, the working class, the Rust Belt. It seems like it almost seems like we are in a power struggle now, like as to who is the real American. I mean, that was in large part the appeal of Trump, right? That his promise he was going to bring back the real American, and this power struggle, in my view, is cast along the fault line of the values and the priorities and the outlooks and sensibilities of people in the city versus the values, the priorities, the outlooks, and sensibilities of people in rural areas. I'll give you one last example, which is in Washington State. Okay, so for non-Americans, Washington State is not Washington, D.C. It's a state on the west side of, it's above California. Anyways, so I was reading somewhere that there's a movement now to divide Washington State in two because because the two sides hate each other. No, because on the west side you have Seattle, then you also, it's very affluent, it's very liberal. You have the headquarters of Microsoft and Amazon, these really prestigious tech companies. It's, and so that's like one culture, that's one demographic, elite, affluent, liberal. Then on the east side, facing Idaho, more more rural. It's conservative. It's basically they're clinging to guns and religion. And so these two sides, they hate each other. That seems to be the dynamic replicating itself everywhere. Like these two sides, the liberal coastal elite, the rural, whatever, they hate each other. They don't understand each other. You can barely twist their arm to get them to concede to peacefully coexist. I mean, forget about understanding each other. Just getting them to peacefully coexist there's a lot of tension around that. And the last thing I will say about this clip, the woman that we heard, the English woman, her name is Katie Hopkins. She has 935,000 followers on Twitter. This thing that she said, that only posh people can care about climate change, only wealthy people have the luxury to worry about climate change, it echoes very closely a mantra that I have continuously heard out of Yellow Vests, which is Macron. He's worried about the end of the world, but we're just worried about the end of the month. Meaning Macron has all these lofty ideas to transition to green economy, but we don't even have money, at the end of the month. And anyways, this whole thing that this tax was supposed to transition France to a green economy ended up being totally bogus. I mean, it ended up being a total lie. That's a whole nother can of worms. Okay, so second point. My second point is, so once again, if we look at these three events, Brexit, Trump, Yellow Vests, we come across the stunning realization, okay, that anti-globalization is now primarily a cause for the right wing, not the left wing, okay? And, this is astonishing to me. This is like culture shock. I mean, there was a time when anti-globalization was the premier cause of the American left. And think of, WTO, like we shut down the World Trade Organization meetings through at least one day was shut down. I think there was a movie made about it, and Naomi Klein, no logo. And now it seems that anti-globalization has fallen off the curriculum of causes of the American left. And now, like, the most high-profile cause that I hear, okay, against globalization, they're coming from the right wing, not from the left wing, like Trump, like Le Pen, like Farage. I mean, there's exceptions, okay? Like France has Mélenchon, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He ran for president in 2017. He's a splinter party of their socialist party. he was vocally against globalization. He was against TPP. I think he was even against the EU. But for the most part, okay, let's take these 4 terms, okay? Rule, right-wing, anti-globalization, populist, okay? It seems these 4 terms are now inextricably linked and almost verging on being coterminous. And the purpose of me making this video is this this coupling now of, you know, right-wing and anti-globalization. Okay, my question is, can we decouple that and bring back anti-globalization as a left-wing cause? Now I'm just going to end with reading 2 articles. The first one, I just want to give you a sense of how the term culture war is being used in a French context. Okay, this is from Le Monde from 17th of January of this year, 2019. Europe face au spectre de la guerre culturelle. Après avoir déchiré les États-Unis pendant encore des siècles, les questions de société dominent le débat public en Europe. La bataille entre progressistes et populistes va-t-elle monopoliser le champ politique? Europe facing the specter of culture war. After tearing apart the US for a quarter of a century, these social issues dominate the public debate in Europe. The battle between progressives and populists, will it monopolize the political field? Okay. Dans un clip diffusé à l'automne 2018 par le gouvernement voulant inciter les citoyennes à voter aux élections européennes de mai, les images se succèdent. Migrants se pressent aux frontières de l'Europe avec ces mots à l'écran. Immigration, maîtriser ou subir. Climat, agir ou ignorer. Et le film se clôt sur ce qui ressemble à un avertissement. 2019, l'Europe changera. En votant, vous décidez comment. I'm not going to translate everything, just briefly it says, in the fall of 2018, there was this clip circulated by the government trying to get people to vote in the European elections in May with images of migrants trying to get into the borders of Europe with these words flashed on the screen. Immigration, should we encourage it or suppress it? Climate change, should we act on it or ignore? And the film ended with what seemed like a warning. In 2019, Europe is going to change. By voting, you decide how. So again, we see in the very title, right, of this article, La bataille entre progressistes et populistes, the battle between progressives and populists. Again, this dichotomy where populism is being set in opposition to progressivism. I mean, I don't agree with this, what is now commonly accepted, that populism is a byword for right wing. Okay, there's nothing inherent to populism that makes it a right wing cause. I mean, wouldn't a Marxist revolution be like the premier populist uprising? So, and anyways, you know, who is this author thinking of when he says progressive? Like, does he think somebody who is like, you know, pro-capitalist and pro-deregulation and pro-privatization of all public spheres and public services, but, you know, they're tolerant of LGBT people and they, you know, do lip service to climate change or greenwash? I mean, is that what the person counts as progressive? Because that's not a progressive. I mean, does the author of this article, does he think, you know, someone like Hillary Clinton, that she counts as a progressive? Because, you know, you can't go around the world invading countries, changing regimes, violating the sovereignty of other people's countries for the benefit of U.S. foreign policy and call yourself a progressive. You know, that's an imperialist. So I think there's a lot of slippage now of terms, and I just want to, you know, put the brakes on the slippage and say, wait a minute, you know, who do you have in mind when you say progressive? Do you think Macron is a progressive because he's, you know, tolerant of LGBT people and he's in line with certain progressive social causes? No, he's not a progressive. So, because his economic policies are neoliberal, so on and so forth. So I just want to, yes, pick apart that article. The last article is from the UK. It's from the Spectator, and this fellow. He's berating Brits for not caring enough about the Yellow Vests. I saw 2 articles in 2 newspapers by 2 separate authors in the UK berating people in the UK for not caring enough or not talking enough about the Yellow Vests, which I think is hilarious because nobody cares about the Yellow Vests in the UK. No, sorry, in the US. No, nobody in the US is talking about the Yellow Vests. Most of them don't even know about it, and I don't hear anybody berating each other. And I think Yellow Vests is actually being talked about a lot in the UK. Yet they're still berating themselves for not talking enough about them. Okay, so here's the article. Why aren't we Brits talking about the revolt just across the English Channel? Our silence on the Gilets jaunes, their spectacular sustained rebellion against the increasing tyrannical rule of Emmanuel Macron, has become pathological. There's been barely any BBC coverage, no words of solidarity from Corbynistas, not a peep from the trade union movement. This is an event of major historical, political, and human interest, and yet is barely discussed in the UK. The British leftists who love sharing Marxist memes and banging on about revolution are virtually silent on the mass revolt in France. Trade union leaders have said nothing. Then it goes on to talk about, if the type of police brutality happening in France was happening in Hungary, like the West would be all up in arms and they'd be all sanctimonious and condemning Orban, but because it's happening in France, it's like there's a double standard. Nobody cares. No world leaders are, criticized. Actually, the UN did reprimand. The UN reprimanded France for excessive use of force against the police against protesters. Very unusual for Western European countries to be reprimanded by the UN. Anyways, okay. So now he gets to why he thinks nobody cares about the Yellow Vests in the UK. The real cause of this indifference is an awareness, at least on some level, of who the Gilets jaunes are, their place in society, and what they are fighting against. Many of the Yellow Vests are in the same demographic as the deplorables in Trump's America and the gamins Brexit Britain, who are widely loathed by the political and media establishment. They are yet another manifestation of the populist insurgency that is tearing at the political rulebook across Europe. That is why the Gilets jaunes terrify observers in the UK. It's also why they deserve our solidarity. So I cite this article for 3 reasons. The first reason is, like me, he is grouping together these 3 events: Trump, Brexit, Yellow Vests. Now, the second reason is, now nowhere in the article does he talk about a division between the city and the country, but I feel that it's implicit in the dichotomy that he's describing, where it's, on one side there's Trump, Brexit, Yellow Vests, and he's setting this, excuse me, in opposition to, well, of course, to the political establishment, but even to the media establishment, right? And so the media establishment is largely a cosmopolitan phenomenon. So even though nowhere does he actually talk about the city versus the country, I feel it's implicit, it's an unacknowledged element in the dichotomy that he's laying out for us. The third reason I cite this article is it circles back to what I was talking about earlier about, we are social types first now, and the social type is inextricably linked to the political position. I mean, he says, why don't more people in the UK, leftists in the UK, care about the Yellow Vests? These are like classical leftist positions they have. They're against neoliberalization. They're against austerity cuts. They want more direct democracy, more democratic control over governance. The British left should be jumping on board with this. And he says the reason why they're not, according to him, is, in a sense, I mean, he doesn't use this word, but in a sense, it's like they're not our social type. They don't drink soy milk, and they don't have an electric car, and they're not going to order I don't know, I don't know, a panini with organic sun-dried tomatoes and, rucola or something. And so because they're not perceived to be our social type, that's how he explains the reticence amongst the British left towards the Yellow Vests. Okay, so all the clips I played and the articles I read from will be in the links below. Thanks so much for watching.